Hey everyone, so today's video is a really exciting one. It might just change how you think about and structure your gsap animations. So we're going to be taking a look at the new gsap.matchMedia, which allows us to set up responsive and accessible animations really easily. So before we jump in, it's worth pointing out that we can already handle quite a lot of responsive animations just by leaning on viewport units to do the heavy lifting for us. So this little tween here is using viewport widths, and then as we resize the screen, the animation just adjusts. It's so simple and so useful. But it's also common to want to create different animations for mobile and desktop. This is sometimes just due to the amount of available space that we have on mobile, but also mobile users tend to be on the go, they've got poorer data connections, and their devices and browsers are less capable. So giving people some simplified animations on mobile is usually really great for user experience. So you've probably come across media queries in CSS. We can use them to set up different styles for different screen sizes. So in this demo, we've got a media query that gives our box a purple background color on smaller screens, and then above 500 pixels, it defaults back to green. So now with gsap's matchmedia, we can do the same thing for our gsap animations. So we're going to start by setting up our matchmedia object. This is kind of similar to how we set up a timeline and then add tweens to it. We're going to set this up and then add different media queries to it. So let's add a small screen media query, and then this function is going to get called whenever this media query matches. Let's make the little box spin around. So any gsap animations that we add in here will automatically get recorded, and then they'll be reverted when the media query doesn't match anymore. So now if we give this a resize, we can see that it spins around on screens less than 500 pixels. Awesome. And then if we size it up again, because the media query doesn't match anymore, the animation gets reverted. So this means all inline styles added by the animation get wiped out. This also works with timelines. So let's create a little sequence. We'll spin the box around and then we'll scale it up. So let's squish the screen down and there's our timeline playing through. Brilliant. So when we resize, the box reverts back to its original state. So we're handling all of the killing and reverting for you, even with scroll triggered animations. So let's make this page scrollable, and then we'll add a little scroll triggered animation. This is saying use the box as the trigger, and then start at the bottom of the screen up to the top and scrub through it. So if we take a look on large screen now, we don't have anything, which is good. And then on mobile, we've got our scroll triggered animation. So we can scrub up and down this animation, and then no matter where we are, on desktop, it's all nicely killed and reverted back to its original state. So lovely stuff. You kind of get the idea now. So let's add another media query for larger screens. We'll get rid of the timeline and we'll just use a simple tween again. And then we'll use min width again for the larger media query. So min width and 501 pixels. And then let's spin the box the other way around on desktop. Awesome, so now smaller screens and larger screens have completely different animations. In this use case, the code is a little bit repetitive though. All we really want to do is to spin this box the other way around. That's the only value that's changing, but we've got to repeat this whole tween all over again. This would be really annoying if you had a complex timeline and had to duplicate all of your code. So let's take a look at a different way that we can write this out to allow for a little bit more conditional logic. So we'll copy over this media query string, but this time we're going to pass in an object with conditions instead. So we'll use the same ones. We've got a check for mobile and a check for desktop. And now this function is going to be called again whenever any of these conditions are true. And we're going to pass in the context this time so we can access these conditions within the function. So if we log this out, there we go, there's our values. So we can see we've got an object with truthy values for mobile and desktop, and then we can use these to do some logic in our tweens. So let's do a little destructuring. We'll grab these values, and then if we write out this tween again, we're going to write it out the same as last time. We want to spin it one way on mobile and then the other way on desktop. Okay, that's a little fast. We'll add a duration, and there. Cool, so now we've got a little bit of conditional logic and no repetition. It's nice and tidy. Now we haven't got an infinitely playing animation now, so you might have noticed that when we resize the screen, as soon as a different condition matches, the tween plays again. So this might be what you want in some cases, but maybe you just want to play the animation through the first time the media query matches, but then not play it through every time we hit a different breakpoint. So we can do this by tapping into is reverted to find out if the context has been reverted in the past. And then we can handle our animations with this in mind. So we can just say, hey, gsap, if this is already reverted, then just set the duration to 0 and immediately complete the tween. Great, so now our animation is only playing through the first time that the media query matches, and any other time that the media query matches, it's just skipping through to the end of the animation. So another really cool thing about MatchMedia is that it's not just for screen sizes. There are tons of media features out there. So we've got ones for device orientation, we've got color preferences, and most importantly for animation, we've got prefers reduced motion. So some people have motion sensitivities, and it's really important that we develop with that in mind. So a simple way to do this is just to add prefers reduced motion checks to our existing queries. Then this code is only ever going to run if the user has no preference set. So let's pop open our accessibility settings. This is just in our user settings, and we're going to check reduce motion. And now if we resize the screen, there's no animation. Awesome. So if we toggle it off again, the animation comes back. So this is great, it's working, but at the moment we've got either no animation or animation. And reduced motion doesn't always mean no motion. Sometimes a little interaction can help to explain something in your interface, and if we remove it, then people can be confused. So sometimes it's good to create a reduced version with an opacity fade instead of large movements. So instead of stacking our queries, let's pull it out into its own condition, and then we can check for it, much in the same way that we did for mobile. So we're going to do a from tween this time. We'll fade in the box and then we'll spin it in different directions again. But if people have an OS preference set for reduced motion, we'll check for that and then we'll just fade it in instead. So now if we toggle this, rather than not having any animation at all, we've got some nice reduced animation. So it's probably worth mentioning, because we've got into some nested ternaries here, that this is just returning a value to feed into rotation. So if this kind of thing isn't very readable for you, you can write out a more long form function and then return your values that way. Really, whatever works best for you. So a little recap on what gsap does when this function runs. So when this function runs and the media query matches, gsap records all of the animations inside and adds them to the context for that media query. And then when it doesn't match anymore, those animations get reverted. But what about animations that happen on interaction? If we add an event listener on this box, the animation's only going to play when we click on it. And that's after the matchMedia function is run, so the tween doesn't get recorded. So if we resize this up now, even though the query isn't matching anymore, the tween's still playing. Not ideal. This isn't really what we want. Interaction's a huge part of animation, so we need to find a way to tell gsap that these animations exist. So we're going to add a new method on the context that we can call later. This can be called anything. We're going to call it spin the box. And this is basically saying, hey gsap, when this function runs, add any animations or scroll triggers in here to the context. Record them for us so we can access them and call them later. Then when the box is clicked, we can call this method and we can play the recorded animations. And because those animations are now part of the context, they'll get reverted when the media query doesn't match anymore. So this is great. This is exactly what we want. But if we click on this on a large screen now, it'll still play the animation. This is a bit annoying. It's because the event listener is still wired up. Event listeners are quite persistent little things, so it's important to clean up after them if you're not using them anymore. Now we do all of the gsap related cleaning up for you, but for this sort of general JavaScript tidying up, you can use a custom cleanup function. So we're going to say, when this doesn't match anymore, remove our event listener for us. So now when we're on mobile and we click, it plays. And when we size up, it's been added to the context, so it gets killed. And then if we try and click on it again on a large screen, we've removed the event listener, so nothing happens. Perfect. So while we're talking about tidying up, we've also got a revert method that we can call on the entire matchMedia object, and this will just revert all of the animations. So if you ever wanted to get rid of all of your animations in one go, this is what you would reach for. There's also an option to pass in some scope. This is really useful if you're working with components. So right now, when the media query matches, gsap's animating all of the elements with a class of box. But if we want to just target elements inside a certain parent or component, we can grab that element and then pass it in. So then gsap's only going to grab the boxes within that container. Now, if we have more than one media query, it might get a little bit repetitive to have to define the scope on each one. So we can also pass in a default scope to the MatchMedia object itself. So this is pretty handy for everyone, but if you're working with a framework like React, it's especially handy. We see a lot of React devs making refs for everything that they want to animate, and that can get really wordy really quickly. But with this scope system, you can just create a ref for the component, the parent element, and then pass that in, and then you have lovely scoped animations. You can just use class names instead of creating refs for everything. Another useful little addition is MatchMedia refresh. This lets us rerun the MatchMedia functions again. So why would this be useful? Let's take a little look at a reduced motion demo. So right now this function's running whenever either of these conditions are true. So this means that a user can toggle their reduced motion preference and the website's animations will adjust. All well and good, but a lot of people don't even know that these settings exist. So to meet AAA Web Content Accessibility guidelines, you need to provide a way for users to disable any inessential animation. This is usually implemented with a reduced motion checkbox. But there's no way to update the user's OS preference with a checkbox. Thank goodness, that would be a mess. But this means that these conditions aren't updating, so this function isn't running again. So we need a way to tell gsap to refresh MatchMedia if the checkbox value changes. So first up, let's grab our checkbox, and then on load, we're going to update it to reflect whatever the user's OS setting is. Then we'll add an event listener on the checkbox, listen to see if it changes, and then we'll call MatchMedia refresh to run all of this code in the MatchMedia function again. So now that we have a way to run this function on demand, we can check the value of the checkbox in here and then use that to adjust our animations. So we're going to override the OS level condition, and then everything else in the function just stays the same. Excellent, so now the animations respect the operating system level settings, but we can also use this toggle to adjust the site-specific animation preferences. Wonderful stuff. And that's the lot. Thanks for watching. If you get stuck, make sure to pop into our forums, check out the blog post that we've written for more information, and as always, happy tweening.